Welcome back, everyone, to Nature of the Business podcast, episode 6. Great to have you back. I'm David.
And I'm Monique.
And today we're going to be talking about team. And every company, every brand, in order for it to grow, you need to have a really strong team. And one of the things that you talked about, Monique, on the last podcast last week, about funding is building out your team. And I'm sure you've learned some things about what it takes to build a great team, and the team can help drive forward the vision of the brand. And I think in general, they're an interesting dynamic because they do evolve based on the life cycle of the company, at what point in time you are in the company. And I think that's something that we certainly have learned at YGN. And why don't you describe the composition of the YGN team today?
So today, YGN is mostly operational staff. So when I say operational staff, I mean our sewing machine operators, artisans, and just shipping and receiving associates. We've got a team of managers. It's about 5 or 6 people that manage the operational staff on the ground. And then we've got one marketing associate, and then it's us, you and I.
So we have what feels like a lean team today. At one point we had a larger team. And what was that? What was the composition of the team at its largest size?
At its largest size, it was still mostly operational staff, but we had a lot more administrative support. We did have raw materials manager and buyer and a bit of a larger marketing team, as well as some HR and just chief of staff support.
Why don't we go back to how you built the team initially, where you started, how you found the first people who joined YGN. And I guess there's like these 2 phases of the business so far, which is like pre-YGN factory, post-YGN factory. How did you find people early on, and what were the qualities that you were looking for in those people?
Early on, my first employees were my sewing machine operators and craftspeople and artisans that I had in the. I started with, like I said, in the last episode, we talked about the people that I hired from home in Dallas. And one of those people is still with us today. And they started by just working from home. And what I was looking for was whether or not they could do the work, whether or not they could actually sew. And they could. And the ones with today, she worked so hard and was diligent and great at communicating and just like great follow-up, and was so passionate about the work that she's doing that when I opened the factory, I actually asked her to start by managing the team. She said yes, and she came in and she got to work with me. She helped me move all the machines into the factory, and then we hired a team to begin managing them. She had no experience in doing that, but she was so eager to learn that I knew she would be able to pick it up.
Yeah, you're Carly we're referring to. And I think this is I feel like this is it's a very consistent characteristic when you're building a company, is that early on, you want to find the people who just are going to punch way above their weight class. They're going to be able to grow, and they're curious and they're hungry. There's so many things to do and so few people to do it. And so you need people who can do more than one thing. And you need people who believe in what you're doing, because it's very small and it's just an idea. And you're just looking for your small band of people who are going to get after it with you. We moved to the factory, and we talked about the fact that you had never run a factory before. You'd never done tech packs. There was a lot that you hadn't done before. How did you go from just opening a factory to having an operation that makes and ships hundreds of thousands of units per year?
We took it step by step. I always say just take the first step, and then you're gonna have to learn how to take the second one if you want to keep moving forward. And that's what exactly what we did. I knew I needed machines. I knew that I needed a building. I knew I needed people to, and that's where we started. And as the business grew, we had to learn how to write POs. We had to learn, in order to continue doing business, you have to learn these things piece by piece. And we just picked it up by experience. We learned on the job. And how we ended up with several retailers and shipping out of a dock and things that
Mm-hmm.
like fathom that you're going to have to know and understand that eventually you end up here and you know it.
What are the characteristics of the people who, in that time, you were looking for? And I know you mentioned after having opened the factory, at that point in time, were you still looking for people who could just do the work, or were you looking for something else? Or was it just like a very functional, we need hands?
Once I began building out the administrative staff, I did start looking for people who had experience in what we were looking for them to do. So I had, for brief time, had an HR manager. I hired someone who had done HR work before, had a recruiter on staff who had done recruiting before. But I also, it was a balance of looking for people with some experience and looking for people who would fit this sort of gritty culture that we had built at YGN so far, because I wanted people to be able to come in, be comfortable, and not disrupt. We had built such a nice, for lack of a better word, vibe in the building. I wanted people who come in and not disrupt that, because it really had helped us get to the.
As far as the blend of growing the company and having a set of people who are manufacturing the product and having a set of administrative people who are focused on the brand, how, if at all, how did you figure out the balance between those two almost distinct teams?
No, I think we're still figuring it out. It was a lot easier when we were smaller. Because I was on the production floor when we were much smaller, it was easier for the operations level employees to feel where I was coming from, know that they were building something with me. And it was less of a separation between executive and administrative staff and the operations employees. As we grew, it became, and I had my responsibilities as the CEO changed, it became more difficult to foster that relationship and keep everyone on the same page.
What was the impetus from going from a larger team to a smaller team?
We hit some financial challenges in 2021. And from there, we did have to lay off quite a bit of our team. It was at a time where we had grown to a point where things became a little muddy as far as operations, that we had grown so quickly. And from there, it was actually, we felt like it was a bit of an opportunity to bring it down to the bones of the operation, build back up from there.
Yeah. And how, it's never fun to have people not join you on different legs of the journey. What has it been like as YGN has had to shed team? Like, what, as the CEO, what has that been like for you, managing and deciding when's the right time to be adding people and when's the right time to effectively have to lay people off?
It's not easy, and I don't think it ever gets easier. But those types of decisions they're probably the most difficult decisions any CEO has to make, as far as who you let go and who you allow to leave and who you don't fight to stay in. There are moments where you've grown with certain people and it feels personal when those relationships have to break. I think you just take it case by case. In some of the instances, there were times where separation was necessary, and in some instances, there are times when we had to really very deliberately make certain breaks in order to be able to move forward towards our goal. In those moments where we were almost forced to whittle it down, we were trying to make the most deliberate decisions about who would be the best people and how we could reinvigorate that energy in the building.
And that balance, if you have to think about it in a year from now, what lessons did you learn from going through this process? And as you build back up, maintaining that connection and the of intimacy of the team. Because I think a lot of people, when they first get started, I've been a part of startups where when you grow, you do grow fast, and the people, and this happens not just in companies, but it happens all the time, where you say, oh, things aren't the same, or the talent isn't the way it used to be, and so we do have an aversion to change in general as humans. And so how do you envision that balance? Because as YGN builds the team in the future.
I think it's important to have deliberate moments that you create that show the team that you're one and you're united and care about one another. As I think that those are important. When we first started, we used to do birthday shows, and we would recognize our employees, we give them a small gift, and we would make sure that we made that time. We carved out that time to celebrate other. We did employee of the month. We did employee anniversaries. And as we grew, first of all, we grew, and then at the same time as we were growing, we began to, like I said earlier, have some cash flow challenges, and those things start to become stale and fall off. Mm-hmm. And something that you do have to deliberately make sure that those things stay in place, because they're important. Although they can feel frivolous and they can feel kind of like fluff and feel good stuff, they're important to maintaining the morale of the culture team.
It sounds like it's really the little things, the kind of care and cultivation of moments and actively showing the team that they're appreciated. It's interesting. I think there's this idea of, so we think about design for product, and there's probably also an idea of how are you designing the team? As an entrepreneur, how are you designing the team, the global you, not just you, but how are you designing your team so that the output of that team is the thing that you want? And as a product designer, there are many different aspects of design. There's the functionality of the design, and then there's the aspect of how the fashion and the function, the fashion of the design, how it looks, the form, as they call it. Probably with, as you're thinking about designing the team, they're like functional nuts and bolts pieces that the team needs. And then there are these, and they're the form, which is how that design feels. Which would you say that those kind of like moments or celebrations, were they both form and function, or are they one or the other?
I guess I would say it's both. I think it becomes part of the fiber of who the company is. There are companies that just don't care about that stuff at all, and there are some employees that are okay with it, and then those things become symbiotic. But we wanted to attract people that, because we're a small business, you have to care about your work. Everyone who comes and sits in the seat is needed, and is needed to be passionate. As it becomes part of those little moments that you create, become part of who your company is and who you want to attract.
What are some other aspects of design of team, whether it's space or whether it's pay or whether it's policy, or what are some other aspects of designing a great team that you think are important?
Well, one thing that I've learned is that when you're hiring, you should be hiring A players, especially when in your first hires, because those people are going to set the tone for the rest of the company, and the rest of the company might not come in and be A players. You might have some B players or C players, but the A players set the tone and pull everybody forward. And so that is one thing that's really important in your first, I would say, 5 to 10 hires, is making sure that those are really good people, because they're going to set the tone for everyone going forward.
Yeah, and I think that in a lot of ways, the mix is important. I think that certainly we've hired A players, but we haven't exclusively hired A players. And I think that's really the key, is not settling, even though you might have some pain, and not settling, because hiring a subpar person is going to do more harm than good. because you ultimately either one, this work is going to be subpar, you end up compensating for that person, or when other people come in, they take on the traits and the habits and the behaviors of the people who were there, and those people model to them what the company's about. And so it is important we have a bunch of A players and hire around those A players so that you're continuously, there's a saying in startups where a lot of people say if they were an early employee and they're there 5 years later or 10 years later, they would say, if I tried to apply for this job today, I would never have gotten a job for the company because the pedigree continues to get better as the company continues to get better. So I think that's interesting, this idea of design and designing the team. Communication is obviously one of those functional pieces. A team can't be a team without communication. And what have been some of the aspects of team that you think are really important, or that maybe you didn't necessarily know before, but now you're like, oh, this is key to having a team operate smoothly?
It's a good one. I think that something I have learned is that having clear processes in place early on is really important so that things don't get confused. Or what's the best word for it? It's a little muddy is also not the best word, but it's important to have processes in place for things to have better structure. Especially early on as you're building, those things really do affect not only the decision making that you do, but the mistakes that are made along the line. And if you don't have a way to track those things, then, you end up in real trouble.
Yeah, and I think that you're right. Structure, so that especially when you're moving quickly, structure is important because there's lots of things that can fall through the cracks, and everyone has a lot on their plates. So when everyone's stretched, then what you need to have is one way to compensate for that stretching is that it's important to put in place those procedures to fill in the gaps where people would usually fill in the gaps, but they might not necessarily do that because there's a lot of things going on.
Right.
As you think about the future of YGN, actually, let's get back to if you're just getting started as an entrepreneur, if you're out there listening and you're thinking about your first 3 hires for your company, what would be your decisioning, or if somebody came to you and asked you, man, I think I need to hire somebody or not, how would you advise them of when they need to hire and when they might not necessarily need to hire?
I think it's actually really important. What I'm learning is that it's actually very important to understand fully the job that you're hiring for before actually hiring for it. So sometimes you say, okay, I need someone to do this thing for my company. I don't necessarily know how to do it, so I'm just going to hire someone who knows how to do it. But sometimes when you do that, specifically if you're bringing them into your company and your company has unique nuances to it, there are things that they'll miss about the nuances of your brand, and it will cause disruption in like the way that things are flowing within the company. And they'll miss certain things that are important about the way that they should be doing their job. Because everyone comes in with their own set of experiences and they might apply those exact experiences to what they're doing at your company. But sometimes it's important to understand the nuance of those things. So if you understand the job that you're hiring first, when they come in, you can mitigate some of the different challenges that they face.
Mm-hmm. That kind of goes back to what you were talking about a few episodes ago, where you knew how to sew. So when you have somebody who sits down at this machine, you can tell the quality of the product itself. I think having confidence in the fact that you can vet and you can be the judge of the person and the quality of their work so that you're not missing anything or there aren't blind spots. I think one aspect of initial hires, if for people out there who are doing their first few hires, is early on structured meetings and check-ins. And there can be one-on-ones, which can be on a monthly cadence, but also structured if you're remote or even if you're in the same space, having just weekly or twice a week 3 times a week check-ins, because what can happen is that you want to just have a standing meeting so that you can clear and you can measure progress. And if there are blockers, you can clear those blockers. And I think it sets the standard that people are going to be held accountable on an ongoing basis, especially if there are your first hires. You need to set the structure that you can hold them accountable. And also setting timelines and dates and deadlines, because if you just have something that's open-ended, what can happen is you can find excuses for the reasons why something didn't happen. But if you have a date, then it says, okay, why isn't this happening on the time frame that this needs to be happening on?
Accountability is so important, especially early on, because that's when people set their expectations of what is expected of them. It's human nature to do the least work. And so you have to make sure you set that expectation up front.
What do you think about, when I hire, I usually try to think about not just the job itself, but the person who's coming to the job. So I try to find people who have a why or a passion, generally speaking, in life, and even to some extent, some adversity, because what that means is that they've worked through hard things and they probably have experience working through hard things. But secondly, that why, whether you've played sports in the past or whether you've played an instrument for a long period of time, or whether you love painting or whether you love running, that process of getting good at something typically transfers through your life. And I usually look for those traits. What's the thing that isn't about the job, that trait that you have in your life that you're going to bring into the job? Are there certain traits that you think about when you hire, and certain types of experiences that people have had that you look for when you're hiring?
Yeah, I tend to lean towards people who can clearly show that they have a strong work ethic. And I like to hire people who can show strong knowledgeability about the subject matter, whether or not they have a ton of experience. So they can sit down and they can talk passionately about the subject that they're going to be working with. Then I like to hire people in that realm.
Yeah. The last thing you want is, it depends on the face of the company, but I would imagine that for any company, the last thing you want is people who are coming just for a paycheck. And I think with any job, that is on the employers. It's the employer's responsibility to create an environment and a why for why you're coming to work, but also on the employee side, whether it might not necessarily financial gain might be the second thing. You might be wanting to learn a certain thing. You might be leaving a place where you didn't have a voice or you didn't have an impact, and you can have an impact. So that, why do you want this job? It almost, somebody says, oh, I want to get paid. Or I saw your website, your brand online, and I thought it was great. That isn't necessarily, in my mind, it's not necessarily enough. It has to be, man, I really love this, or I wear head wraps all the time, or that aspect of, you're going to have pride, to your point, in the work that you do. And there's going to be a reason why you decide on, because you can, if you're a good candidate, you'll be able to find your pick of jobs. It's like a relationship where you're going to want to find that you're going to want to have someone who wants to be there. You're going to want to show that you want them there. And you want that match. And it can't just be a functional.
Yeah, some of our best employees really have been with me since one of the factory. And it's because they really have shown passion for their work. And that causes them to stay in good times and in bad times. And we always make sure, as a company in general, to take good care of our employees. We try to put them first. So with this back and forth relationship of they can participate in something that they're really passionate about and still know that we have their back in whatever changes that they're going through.
We talked on, I think it was the first podcast, about when things get really hard, what keeps you going? And you said the team who shows up every day, and so they keep you going. And obviously you're creating the environment to support the team. What's one moment that stands out of your mind about when the team just really showed up?
I would say, and this happened actually recently, it's every company's nightmare when you have trouble sort of meeting payroll. And we had a moment last year where we had trouble meeting payroll. and it's real. And the team really stepped up. We communicated with them and they stepped up and they said, okay, we want this to work. We want this company to move forward. And everyone just worked with us. Of course, we got everyone paid, but everyone just worked with us to just put their hand to the plow and make sure that we could continue moving forward, even though we had hit that roadblock.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that really does say a lot because at the end of the day, it's a transaction. And if the company can't pay, the employee can leave and they should leave. And so I think it does say a lot when people are willing to give a little bit outside of and the company as well works to create the environment and the employees are willing to give. The moment that comes to mind for me, obviously there have been lots of moments where the team has showed that they care about the company, but I think one of the moments was the flood, and when our factory got flooded and everything was destroyed. You want to tell the story about how long it took for us to get back up and going again?
Yeah, it really hit us hard. So it was a moment where it was unexpected. So it was a regular rainy night, and because of work that the city had been doing on the streets, literally it's like a river ran from the front to the back of our factory and washed everything away. And so it was really, then we had to shut down the building. And we ended up having to go into sort of reduced operation mode while our building was being somewhat restored for, I believe it was 3 to 4 weeks that we were in complete reduced operations and trying to restore inventory that we had lost, about $150,000 worth of inventory, the business that we were losing. It was a really difficult time. We ended up having to temporarily lay off a portion of our staff, and those people they waited. They said, we really want to work here. They could go get a job somewhere else, but we want to work here. And they waited for us to be able to bring the operation back up to some of increased capacity so that they could be hired back on. And it really was a time where everyone just rolled up their sleeves and they knew that it was a difficult time for the company, but they wanted to do what they could to help.
Yeah, I think that at a point where your entire operation is just literally washed away, to have people just come in and help clean up, to figure out how you can get back online, help you figure out how you get back online and put back together the pieces. I think that was a moment. And ultimately there are so many moments. And I think that sometimes you just look out, right? I think we have a really great team, shouting out Carly and Ricardo and obviously Sean and everyone in the production team and Christine. We have an amazing team who just continues to show up, and the company wouldn't be what it is without those people. You couldn't do it by yourself. It is really a team effort. Really do see what people really care about. I think they're bedrocks of memories. They build into the foundation of the company. As you think about the next stretch for YGN, based on where we are right now and based on what the company is becoming, you've had designers who've worked under you. We've had an extension of the marketing team. We are making the shift from direct to consumer to retail. How do you think about the future of the YGN team if you had to create the org chart for the company in the future?
Our company is pretty interesting in that we have the marketing, the shipping, and the manufacturing under one roof. And so it's really important to start from the top there, and any areas where we're missing or there are gaps in responsibility, to add people there at that level that can pull us forward. We have a clear vision now because we've been going for the past 3 years on this path of what the next 5 years should look like. And so now we know, okay, we need someone who has that type of experience or has been there where we want to be in 5 years to come on and start building the team back down from there.
Yeah, you can make every mistake yourself. And if you can borrow experience from someone else who has been there, again, there's this balance between not having done something before. We talked about that earlier in the conversation of not having done something before and finding somebody who can help you get to from where you are today to that place, and understanding the role and understanding some of the nuances that role might require that as a team or as a CEO, you need to translate for that new hire. I think that's really important. And at the same time, there's like this balance between this is how I did it, this is how it always should be done, and this is all the versus, okay, these are the things that we can take from the experience that we had over here, but how do we mold that to fit where this company is today and where this company wants to go? And I think it is a nuance of not just hiring someone who said, okay, I got these companies into these distribution channels. It has to be, okay, this is the nuance of this brand and how this brand has to move into these channels. And this is what I learned over here that might be applicable in this situation.
Yeah, and I think it helps that because we have been going for a few years now, we have an established idea of how the skeleton of the brand runs, so that when people come in, they don't feel like they are building it from scratch. Like they really into a function inside the brand and can have some framework for how their experience fits in.
One thing that just came to mind is that because YGN has a factory and is located in Dallas, I'm in Austin. And so there's this tension between, I don't even call it tension, but there's a lot of value in being on the ground because a lot of people are on the ground and stuff is made there in the factory, and just fully understanding, getting what it's about. How do you think about that in a world that is moving more virtual? And effectively, you do have these teams where there are some norms where it is remote, and then they're in a factory, it can't be remote. How do you balance those two ideas?
Yeah, it's taboo for an employer to say these days. I think it is important to be on the ground, especially in a company that it's a little newer. We're pretty much still a baby of a brand. And so we're still learning who we are and how we want to operate. And we're still building out the systems that really form the DNA of our brand. And it's important that people know each other well so that they can work well together. Because it's not just a plug and play. I have this skill, I'm doing this job, and I'm going to log out, and that's it. But it's really important that we build something that is that works well together.
Yeah, I think that is every company is going to have their own DNA. And I don't think that it should be taboo to say, oh, this is the way it should be. And it is a really good filter, because then you can filter out the people who that's not their jam. That's not how they fit.
That's true. And I would say that it's unique to every brand what that brand needs. There are brands that I would say probably more tech-focused brands can do most of their work online and not have to be in the building, but we don't do that. A lot of what we do is hands-on, a lot of what we do is community-based, and that sort of lends to a more in-person.
Got it. Yeah. If you had to look back on through this conversation, what I've heard you say a number of times is, I've learned this and I've learned that. If you had to sum up at this point the top 3 lessons that you've learned, if you had to reduce it down to the 3 most important aspects of building a team, what would they be?
One important thing that I've learned, I think we started early on, running the factory, I had this imposter syndrome of, I can't really hire someone who has that much experience because how am I going to manage them? I don't know how to do that yet. And just having the confidence to say, okay, no, we need the top people and we need someone who fits well, and we can't just take anybody. That's important, especially early on, is to be very careful about those first hires. I would say another thing that I've learned is, like you said, to have very frequent check-ins and make sure you over communicate, especially when you're building early on, because you want to be able to clearly communicate what your vision is so that everyone is on the same page. And the third thing I think would be we also talked about before, whatever it is you want your culture to be, whatever you want to include the regular everyday operations of your team, because you can have it in your head, but if they don't constantly feel it, it might get lost. So those would be the 3 things I think there are ways that I could have done those things better in the past, I would do differently this time.
If you had to, and you've talked in the past about the what you want the workplace of YGN to be like, and what you think that stands for today, as you look forward and you have the opportunity to look forward, what do you want the YGN workplace and the people who come to work every day at YGN to get out of the work that they do?
We're already building something really special in that every person that is in our buildings is celebrated for the work that they do. I really am impressed with everyone in the work that they do across the company. And I think that's important, is that when people come in, they don't feel like they are just replaceable. Everyone can be technically replaced, but like it's not feel so their their job is less important than, say, a manager's job or, say, an executive's job. It's not, because the truth is we are all working together to make this happen. And we have really built something very extraordinary. So for people to be able to come in and be proud of where they work and to feel safe and supported in.
Mhm. I think that's really inspiring. The idea of being celebrated for your work. I think that does get lost. And I also think that the idea that everyone feels appreciated, that doesn't happen all the time at work. And I don't think that I don't think that a lot of times employers, they think about it, but it usually is a second afterthought. And so I think that having that be top of mind as we're building the YGN team for the next leg of our journey is a really powerful idea. So I think do you have anything else that you wanted to share with the listeners about team and building team if you're building a company or building a brand?
No, I think that those things go a long way. Like I said, sometimes it feels fluffy, but it means a lot. And it's not only for the feel good of it's just the right thing to do, but it's also going to contribute to the way that people interact with your company. And people feel it from the customer all the way through the brand. So it's important.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Monique. We appreciate it. And what will we talk about next?
Let's talk about the brand. Let's talk about building the brand of YGN.
Okay. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. This is the YGN Nature of the Business Podcast, episode 6. We'll be back next time to talk about how to build a brand. Thanks so much, guys. Talk to you guys next week.